take this startup and we put them in front of their customer, what is their customer going to say?
Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, aka Max B, founder and podcast producer at MaxPodcasting. And you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode Colt 145, and today's guest is Max B. Yes, Max Brickman. This is the long-awaited, highly esteemed, award-winning interview between Max B and Max B. It's a true dream come true. Max is an incredible person. We go back to college at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. I knew at the time from having some entrepreneurship classes with him that he had pretty good business sense, a pretty good entrepreneurship sense. I had no idea at the time how deep those roots went. I mean, he started business after business. He is the managing director of Heartland Ventures, which connects Silicon Valley startups with Midwest companies, family businesses, awesome businesses. He invented Clean Slate, turned it from a class project to an actual business that is now licensed. That's kind of, for anybody who has ever taken a test on a Scantron, you'll get a real kick out of that one. He also has real estate businesses, landscaping businesses going back to age 14. In this episode, we talked about all the above and his tips on organization, credibility, social proof, and a really corny billboard from the Midwest. It is Max B with Max B. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Max Brickman, Max B, the one and only Max. No, I'm not talking about myself in third person, but my buddy from college who has done some pretty cool things before college, during college, after college as well. Managing director of Heartland Ventures. Max, thanks for joining. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for joining. Before we get into Heartland Ventures and some other inventions as well, you got your start in business at like a very, very young age. Now people are going to think like age 2 or 3, so I kind of sold you short there. But like when you were in middle school, high school, it's really when you got your foray into entrepreneurship. What is the biggest lesson you learned from like your first foray into this world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I started a landscaping company when I was 14. Honestly, it was at a time when I wasn't doing that well in school. And I kind of found entrepreneurship as a bit of an outlet, where I was able to apply what I was learning in school and, kind of more see the results of what I was doing. And when starting something, I kind of relied on, I don't want to say like expert advice, but that there was always something I didn't know that would prevent me from starting a business. That like, I couldn't start a landscaping company because you really have to be an expert in that space, or couldn't buy a property because it becomes so complicated. And then I think just realizing that with enough effort, there's enough resources out there that you can identify and solve all the problems that would otherwise kind of be a barrier.
There's new barriers for any entrepreneur, but there's like barriers on barriers for like a 14-year-old entrepreneur. I mean, I can't even imagine. At that time, I was probably transitioning from like Tony Hawk Pro Skater to Call of Duty. That was probably the majority of my time. Landscaping, real estate, those are both areas that people need a lot of help in. And what is it that first pulled you into the landscaping route?
When you're 14, don't have that many skills. So, you can problem solve for some, but still kind of early on. I wanted to start something, and I really enjoyed kind of the sense of accomplishment that comes with growing something, and saw that early on, starting the landscaping company. It's something that really relied on, sales and marketing more than the business. People need that, but most people aren't that picky in what they have. So they're kind of willing to hire a 14-year-old. It allows a 14-year-old to be able to sell their neighbors on something where they can actually charge for it. And if their grass isn't cut properly or something else, there's a lot of leeway that goes along with it. So it's a very forgiving business to start when you don't have a lot of skills.
Exactly. I mean, certainly had at least 1 or 2 skills, but like, what were your neighbors' reactions when, come up, knock on the door and you're like, hey, I have a business. I'm sure your voice wasn't that high, but 14-year-old kid, but you have a business and you're wanting to help them out, and this is not your only customer. What's your reaction to seeing you at that age with that initiative?
Honestly, at the time, I think I probably leveraged it. The kid down the street, again, people are willing to kind of take a more of a risk on them, showing that I do live down the road, that I'm not, that I'm trustworthy. They're willing to take a bit of a risk. And I think when you're at an age like that, people appreciate that. It can actually be a bit of an asset. And I think the same thing goes for starting something when you're in school. People want to help someone who is trying to start something early and maybe is trying to work their way through school. Leveraging the situation can be helpful.
Definitely. And I think as you get older and kind of look back, like it's always very impressive when you see somebody at a young age that does take that initiative. But kind of on the flip side of that, like when you're 14, what are your friends' reaction to you doing that when they're, for example, playing Tony Hawk and Call of Duty and all these things? I mean, there's a vast difference there.
Yeah. I mean, I ended up working with a lot of them. A lot of them, ended up joining the company or working with me, and, having, a few dollars in spending money was pretty nice at 14 or 15. I think most of the people I ended up surrounding myself with were working some, one way or another. And we kind of pushed each other. There were fewer distractions of, after school, we would all, work as opposed to going home and playing video games. And that kind of became the peer group, and there's less to be missing.
From there, you really got into the real estate, that's a tongue twister, but you really got into the real estate world. How did you learn enough about real estate at that time to really go all in a business there?
Yeah. I mean, I remember just researching it at the time and reading a lot of, forums and posts about it. It really started because I was doing landscaping for a couple property owners, and they, were considering selling one of their properties. And I was kind of talking to them about it and kind of thinking, well, what if I bought it, kind of thing. And they kind of, laughed at that, and, but started researching it and seeing, okay, what are the different elements that you have to have? Like you got to find money for a down payment, you need financing, you need to be able to manage it, you need to make sure the numbers work out. So I started researching into every aspect and basically just making a list of everything that I had to hit. It was not a nice property, so the down payment wasn't significant. So, I knew if I saved up enough from the landscaping, I would be able to hit that. Down payment, wasn't able to do that because I had no credit, but figured, hey, this thing could actually make some money. I could basically pay someone to get the loan or to co-sign on it. So I was able to find someone to do that. And then, on the, is this a good deal type situation? Real estate's one of those areas where there's a finite amount of variables. When you're diligencing a property, you have your income and your expenses, and your income is just your rent. There's enough public resources that you can look to see, okay, what's market rent in this area for a house like this? And that covers all of your assumptions for your rent. On your expenses, most of them are standard. Your utilities that you can look up, insurance you can get a quote for, property taxes are fixed. There's only a few variable costs, and most of that's the occupancy and the maintenance. Once you really map all that out, it starts to feel very tangible and just kind of less nebulous of infinite number of variables, only a few things that you can actually control.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think no matter what you're working on, what the challenge is, like if it's something that seems daunting, just starting to kind of pry into it, dig into it a little bit, do some research, put some numbers together. That goes such a long way, no matter what you're working on. You kind of rattled off lots of different numbers and things to look at and assumptions there. How the hell did you do all of this, like multiple businesses, while going to school?
I don't know. You make time for the things that you prioritize, I guess.
So not much prioritizing school.
I guess yes, that's a fair reaction to that. At my school, there's actually like an internship program where you were able to take off school early. There was more senior year, and I think they had a junior year too. If you had a job or an internship, and was able to basically make myself the employer. So I was able to leave, cram in all my classes, before like 1 o'clock or something, and leave and work from 1 or 2 to until it got dark. If it was landscaping, that was certainly helpful.
Speaking of school, let's get schooled on, see what I did there, on a couple of your more recent businesses. And so I'm talking about Clean Slate and Heartland Ventures. Clean Slate, I think let's start there because this is really cool. I kind of have a personal tie there. We overlapped at Kelly. We're a few business classes together, a few entrepreneurship classes. And I remember for one of those class projects, I had heard from our mutual friend, Joey Fitzsimmons. Shout out, Joey. I remember you had this idea that was kind of like a Scantron, like anti-cheating idea. It was a cool idea at the time. I didn't know much about it. And I remember Joey saying that, yeah, I think he's actually going to like pursue this. Like he actually wants to make this like a real business, maybe like sell it one day. And I was just blown away at the time. Obviously, so much going on at school, and like the thought of adding a business onto that was like, there's a big difference between class projects and real life projects / businesses. That's just really cool. That always sticks with me when I think about you and your story. Can you shed some light on kind of where this idea for Clean Slate came from in the first place?
It started as really, I think, a class project of wanting us to, solve a problem in the classroom. They had just installed these like cheating prevention cameras that I thought were ridiculous. And I think they cost like $25,000 to put up and another like 15 or 20 a year to maintain.
Jesus.
It was a waste of money. The main form of cheating that they were looking to prevent was, looking over someone's shoulder. You thought, why can't you have, a piece of paper that, you can see, but, someone sitting next to you can't. You think of like those privacy filters that you have on your phone or on your computer. Why hasn't that been applied to paper? It's something where you can actually write through that. Started playing around with that and, researching different kinds of paper and inks and dyes, and started ordering all these chemicals to my apartment. And
I'm kind of getting Walter White vibes here.
Yeah. I'm just glad the FBI didn't show up. No, it was really just a very similar technology that exists in like cardless copy paper. It wasn't anything too complex. It was all things you could, pretty easily learn about online. I just enjoyed the process of kind of iterating on it and until it worked, getting kind of those breakthroughs and seeing that, hey, this could be possible, but this part doesn't work. And then trying to find, a solution to that. Kind of started off as a bit of a hobby. Same with the landscaping. I probably take too many things to the nth degree, and of like, hey, let's just do this bigger, instead of, just making a class project. Like, what if, we can actually commercialize this? And so started taking it to teachers, and then went to, a convention where there was like for cheating prevention, and took the product there and, basically brought it to the heads of academic integrity at all these universities and said, hey, if I were to actually make this and put it in production, would you buy it? And was able to get 10 or 15 basically signed LOIs at that conference of like, yeah, we would pay for this if you could make it and get the cost down to this price. So it kind of set a mark of, okay, so if I actually can figure out how to put this in production, get the price down, do all these things, there's a market for it. So it kind of just became seeing how far I could reach, and then kind of figuring out how to get there, once the goal's been set.
You see that all the time in kind of the world of inventions, we'll call it, just to sound corny. I distinctly remember one of the entrepreneurship professors at Kelly saying that, there's not really any new ideas. It's just taking ideas from other industries and putting them together. Like, that's creativity and like inventions in a nutshell. The thought of having paper, not like a different material, not like a privacy screen, something like that. The thought of like having a form of paper that literally, like, when you're looking at it from different angles, shields and kind of prevents cheating, that's just mind-blowing. I think that's such a cool idea. What point did you realize that we could actually make this work? Like, there's actually, chemicals, materials out there that we can make this a reality.
Yeah, it was sort of a why not try for it, and it kind of, I don't know, I guess I see it as a bit of a challenge or kind of a game. I think it's those like small breakthroughs that you get of when you're first iterating on something, trying to get the first version of the product was terrible and incredibly clunky, and it barely worked, but it kind of gave like hey, there's kind of something to this. And then it just became, well, what's the worst thing about it? And how can we kind of solve that? And sometimes that creates a new problem. And sometimes it just kind of checks one of the problems off the list. Once you check enough of those things off the list, it can become, good enough to kind of take to the next step where it becomes better than, the current option. So I think it was really just, again, identifying all of the elements that would have needed, okay, if we were to have a paper that accomplished what we needed, what elements does it have to have? You need to be able to see it. Your neighbor can't see it. You need to be able to run it through a scanner. It needs to be inexpensive. What's out there that allows for those things? And, for instance, not seeing it at an angle. Okay, that's one of the elements. Okay, well, privacy filters already accomplish that, but they're plastic. Okay, but what's the technology behind privacy filters that allow for that? And can you just, instead of putting it in plastic, could you, put it into paper? Something that you can write through. To your earlier point, seeing what else is out there and seeing what you can apply. Not everything has to be completely reinvented.
Right, but are you able to sleep at night knowing that there's probably tons of cheating students out there that just probably hate your guts?
So I waited until after I graduated to actually take it to market.
Very, very strategic.
No, they're mainly using it internationally. I think if this were 20 years ago, I think there would be a much bigger market for this. The transition to computer-based testing certainly shrunk the market in the US, but internationally there is still a market for it. So we were able to license it to a couple international companies.
Absolutely. And I think anybody our age, like, clearly, and maybe shudders from it because it's always like when it was test time, but clearly has lots of memories / kind of poor nostalgia about Scantrons. And when you said those Scantrons getting whipped out, it was test time. I mean, you knew it wasn't going to be fun. You mentioned the licensing piece, and which is an awesome, I think it's a really cool route to go from a product standpoint. Is that licensing kind of exit strategy something that you had in mind from the beginning?
No, at the beginning, I wanted to take it further, honestly. I quickly realized that the sales cycle for the education system is incredibly long. So to try to sell this school by school, every school wants to do a pilot, and every school has their own procurement process. And it's not that expensive of a product. It's paper.
You got to hit up Dunder Mifflin.
Exactly. But a lot of these education supply companies, they already have the relationships with thousands of schools, and they're already selling them 100 different products. So if you can just add this in as one new product that they can sell, that's so much more efficient. It quickly became clear that there needed to be a partnership with an existing supplier, unless we were going to build out a whole suite of products that we could sell alongside it. Otherwise, it didn't justify the kind of the one-to-one sales cost.
What would you say is the key tip that you would share for anybody who's considering getting their product license?
I think showing whoever wants to license it or whoever you think could license it that there's demand. Looking back, I think the most important thing that I did was just going to those conferences and getting commitments from schools. The product wasn't done, and the product wasn't even ready. The fact that we had decision makers saying, yes, if this were to be produced, I'd be in. Having 15 of those and taking that to a company that could license your product is perfect for them, because it takes a lot of the risk off the table. They say, okay, well, we have the resources to put this in market. We already know most of these schools. And now we know, okay, if we invest in actually taking this over the finish line, people will want it.
It's amazing that people kind of bought into it while it wasn't even fully produced yet. That demand clearly goes such a long way. I'd love to wipe the slate clean, if you will. Don't know how I thought of that one, but get to Heartland Ventures. You have like the clean slate chapter. Obviously you have your earlier businesses as well, but somewhere along the way, you got the VC bug. What pulled you into venture capital?
It sort of just happened. It was kind of a byproduct of moving to South Bend, which, I moved to South Bend and had just, licensed clean slate. Tried to meet as many interesting people as I could there. I moved there because my girlfriend, now wife, was going to grad school there. So I moved to South Bend, didn't know anyone, and, met everybody that I could. I didn't really have any plans at that point of what I was going to be doing next. But everyone that I kept meeting that was doing interesting things that were in South Bend were running, $500 million RV companies, or, huge logistics companies or construction companies, these companies that completely fly under the radar, but exist in places like South Bend and Elkhart, Indiana, where they're great operating companies. A lot of them are multi-generational, the companies that you drive by on the side of, on the highway that, have a huge 100,000 square foot facility and you don't think much about. Those are oftentimes amazing businesses.
Yeah, that's growing up in Ohio, like driving through Indiana tons for school, like Ohio, Indiana, so many states in the Midwest. It's like there's just tons and tons of those businesses.
And those businesses are now looking for more access to technology. How can they make their businesses more efficient? The market's becoming more competitive, and sometimes you have the next generation taking over. Maybe grew up differently and wants to put their mark in the business, and a lot of times that means automation or just process improvement. So they're looking for technology, but most of a lot of the technology that's being developed for industries like that, automation, robotics, that's coming from different tech hubs around the country. A lot of cases the coast, more and more in the Midwest, but it's coming from San Francisco or Boston or New York, and they're not interacting. The manufacturer, off the side of a highway that's still a great business, is not interacting with the folks that are getting funded out in the Bay Area. They end up seeing that technology later on. Started with the manufacturer in the Midwest wanting to adopt new technology, and the startups on the coast that would kill to be able to get access to $1 billion manufacturing company in Indiana where there's one or two decision makers because it's family owned. So it really started as kind of matchmaking of connecting a startup that's being developed in the coast, solving a problem for the manufacturing space, and where the manufacturing company said, there's something to this. This company is really solving a pain point. I want to pay to make this problem go away. That gave validation for us that this coastal Bay Area startup is onto something, even though they might have just started. Really started the fund to connect the two, and where there's a fit, where the manufacturer said, yeah, again, this is something I want to use. That's where we invested.
Are there common themes that you're seeing when there is this fit between these companies?
Yeah, I think going back to kind of with clean slate of being able to validate product market fit, I think the common factor between all of them is it could be a great technology, it could be incredibly interesting, but take this startup and we put them in front of their customer. What is their customer going to say? Yeah, they could be impressed by the technology, but they're going to look at it as, is this generating an ROI for me? And so really the common factor is the manufacturers get excited about it, the customers get excited about it, not necessarily, we as investors. What we want to know is, do people want to buy this? So I think similar to, you asked before of what do you need to know to license the technology? You need to be able to prove product market fit, show that people want to buy your product and you have LOIs, lined up for the licensing company. I think the same thing is the case for any startup, getting funding, showing that there are customers lined up wanting to, pay for my product. So our investment model is really just solving for that, taking the startup, introducing them to the customer and seeing if there's a fit.
Yeah, that proof and credibility goes so far. I mean, whenever I think of VC firms, I'm always really fascinated in how did you pick the companies in your portfolio? You will not be able to guess this question, but
Yeah, we spend, a lot before COVID, a lot of time traveling. We have a
Oh, I thought you were saying a lot of time traveling. Oh, wow,
oh yeah,
you're very in the future.
Yeah, that's the tech side. We have a partner in New York, and we have someone based out in the Bay Area. For a long time, I was out in San Francisco every Thursday. So it's meeting with a lot of other investors, other people that are seeing deals constantly. Where we want to position ourselves. It's competitive. It's competitive to find deals, for the investors. From our perspective, we're kind of selling money in a way. So we need to be able to show that, we're the best investor to go with. So we take the approach of speaking with other VCs, other investors on the value that we provide. That value is really connectivity to customers in the Midwest. So a lot of the deals we see is talking to another VC out in the Bay Area. They say, hey, there's a founder that came out of, Lyft. He's one of the first employees at Lyft, and he left and he started this logistics company. The founder seems great. Technology seems interesting, but what do the customers say? What do the trucking companies say? I'm not talking to them on a daily basis. That's where they bring us in. We'll introduce them to a bunch of logistics companies who would be the customers and provide that feedback.
It's fascinating that no matter what line of business you're in, having those connections, having that camaraderie with people in a similar line of work, you just never know who's going to refer people your way. And what you've kind of stumbled on is there might be, companies and founders from the traditional now Silicon Valley, which are perfect fits with some sort of company that does X in the Midwest. There's synergies that can really work out here. And on your end as managing director, how much of your time is split kind of between focusing on the VC side and focusing on more of the entrepreneur, scaling Heartland Ventures side?
That's a good question. It's pretty even. I actually try to separate it out into days, and so that it's not going back and forth multiple times per day. And that's why, going out to San Francisco on a specific day, or, it helps keep you focused kind of on one thing for that day. But It's always both. We have to, first of all, we have to raise our fund, our next fund, which we just closed, but major amount of focus there. Then we have to focus on deploying it, relationships on the coast, looking at startups, evaluating companies. And then there's, to your point, kind of the entrepreneurial side of, we're still a business. We're trying to grow our network as a fund, look ahead to raising fund 3 and growing, our network and growing our team. It's kind of a constant balance between all those.
Man has a system. If you need a system for your podcast, I'm talking if you want to save tons of time with your podcast, but still have that awesome high quality podcast that you deserve for your business, for your brand, email me at max@maxpodcasting.com. We will bring your podcast to life, and you will be very, very, very thankful for the hours you get back to spend however you want on your business. Now, back to Max and a little bit more about his system. And I guess we should switch gears a little bit as well. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get to inspiration, creativity. You just made a comment. I think it's really interesting. I haven't heard too many people talk about it this way. But the fact of kind of blocking your day, like almost alternating or just having separate days where you're like the entrepreneur mindset, the VC mindset. What tips overall are helping you kind of stay diligent and like stay in those mindsets on a weekly basis? The
way I usually run my day is I have lists on lists, and as I'm going through the day, I'll constantly be adding things of, after a meeting, where there's follow-ups, I'll be adding to it, and a new idea, comes to mind, I'll add it. And then really at the end of the day, I'll prioritize them, the ones that, I don't need to do, or in hindsight, wasn't that great of an idea. I'll filter those out, and then I'll, quickly just sort of, put it in different buckets. I'll use like different numbers for, what part of what I do. Is this more entrepreneurial? Is this more for evaluating new startups? And then that way, when I block out my day for one of those specific projects, I can just quickly go to that list, skim for that category, know exactly what I need to be doing, as opposed to, okay, I need to be focusing on finding new startups to invest in and kind of not knowing where to start. It can be difficult to jump from one area of your business to the other, but if you create lists so that when it comes time to segmenting your day and wanting to work on one aspect of your business, you can just look for that category and jump right into it.
Yeah, it seems like a great system. I'm all for repetitions. List on list sounds good. That's something that I found like pretty early on when I was starting Max Podcasting is like, to start when you have your first handful of clients, you can kind of do a lot intuitively, and you kind of know when to focus on different areas and when to do what. But as you grow, you need to get more and more focused, keep more and more of an emphasis on organization. And so whether that's lists on lists or like, spreadsheets, however you want to stay organized, like that is so key, and clearly it's a big help to your business. But on kind of like the flip side of that, what do you do, when you're not in kind of like super list organization focus mode, which we'll just coin that, maybe trademark that. What are your favorite hobbies or activities that help you kind of refresh your mind and stay creative?
Yeah, I mean, I love to cook. I was going to go to culinary school, and where I went to college, where we met. I ended up not going, but I worked in restaurants for a while. Just love to cook. It's an opportunity where you can be as creative as you want, but also where there's still kind of I don't want to say like an objective outcome, but you can still kind of evaluate yourself after, but still be as creative as you want.
It came up in a previous podcast that like cooking is so fun because you're literally always rewarded with food. Like that's guaranteed.
Yeah, that's true. The worst case scenario is still a pretty good one.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're still ending with more than you started with. But that's a good one. Do you have a favorite meal that you cook these days?
I always loved like Korean food, but never, like I would always eat it and have no idea. I couldn't explain what was in it. I didn't know like what the ingredients were. I just knew I liked it. So I started making like different Korean like stews and soups and that kind of thing, and kind of gives you more opportunity to kind of adjust it based on your taste and understand more of what goes into it. And
yeah, Korean food is crazy good. It never gets old. And on the consumption note, what do you consume mentally? That sounds like a drug reference or something, but that's not what I mean. What type of sites or kind of resources are like your go-tos for staying in the know in the industries that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time on PitchBook. They have good resources and kind of take care of a lot of the heavy lifting. I know there's a subscription for it, but most of the information is they pull from other places anyway. Whether it's Bloomberg or Crunchbase or VentureBeat or any of the sort of like tech focused or VC focused outlets, I think do a pretty good job of covering the space and kind of keep you in the loop of what the trends are, of what type of companies are getting funded, which funds are growing, just kind of where the industry is heading.
Now I'm envisioning like lists on lists of all your favorite spots that you like to Google. So let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shoutout of the Week.
The Wild Business Shoutout of the Week!
Wild Business Shoutout of the Week. This is where we talk about a wild business shoutout, something creative, some creative marketing, advertising that broke through. And there's a really, really corny billboard that you saw, but it's clever. We'll give it to you. Can you share what you saw and kind of why it's memorable?
Yeah, it's definitely corny, but it also stuck. I feel like gimmicky marketing, or not gimmicky, but
yeah, no, it's definitely gimmicky.
Yeah, gimmicky marketing is kind of like what you think of when you think of kind of like cliche billboards or slogans or jingles, and it kind of fits more into that bucket. But there's a billboard of a bird and a dog, and the bird went cheap and the dog went bark, so it was cheap bark. And it was for mulch. The landscaper and me appreciated that, and it always stuck.
No, that's great. When you're driving and you see this, it's literally like a giant chick or chicken and a giant dog. Like it's literally just big images of this. It sounds kind of minimalist at the same time.
It is like a bird on a tree and a dog barking at the bird. Designing a good billboard, I think, is incredibly difficult. In a couple of if you're not an established brand where you can just sort of put your brand out there and put something associated with it and people will remember it, if a brand for Coca-Cola or something is a lot easier, I think, for a billboard, because people know very quickly what Coke is and then you can associate something to it. But a new brand that you have to educate someone on and explain what you're selling, what you're doing, while someone's driving and is only looking at the billboard for a second or two, I think is incredibly difficult. So the ability to accomplish everything that you want while you're driving by, glancing at a billboard is just really impressive.
It is. And anything that kind of like gets you excited about mulch, I think should win like a Pulitzer or something, because that's real there. But let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Sure.
All right, let's get wild. So no, I'm just kidding. You imagine if we just like kept talking about a billboard for no, but Barcelona. I know you studied abroad there. What was your favorite part about your time in Barcelona?
I gotta say the food.
The Korean food.
The Korean food, exactly. No, like the kind of street food that you could get. But the only problem is you can't take it and walk and eat. People will look at you funny. There's no coffee to go. You have to sit down and spend 20 minutes, but otherwise the food's incredibly, incredibly good.
And I know you also have an interest in cycling. What is a cycling tip you can share? A way to get faster on your bike?
I hate to say it, but getting a nice bike. I think the technology's gotten so good that there's such an advantage in having not just lightweight bikes, but bikes with so little resistance. There is definitely an advantage there.
Definitely. That's the Lance Armstrong secret, I'm sure. How about weird talents? Is there like a weird talent or party trick that you're just really good at? It doesn't really impact your business, but you have a knack for it.
I guess I got to go back to cooking. It's a good party trick, especially a good late night meal.
And is that like, is your go-to late night meals? Is it like a 10 o'clock dinner type thing?
No, but when it's at the end of a night, I think you can be a little bit more creative. Inhibition goes away and you can just sort of try new things. And I think that's a dangerous but fun time to cook.
And speaking of dangerous but fun, what is your favorite memory from your time at IU?
I got to say Little Five. The fact that cycling can be such a big part of a college experience is a great combination.
It is. It's like a combination of two wheels over and over again. Everything ties together. You got the cycling, you got the cooking, all the C's, all the Max B's. I'm just going to drop the beat here. But Max, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Really, really appreciate you sharing. Really Fuck. Really, really appreciate you sharing your tips, your stories, your, anti-cheating devices, your cooking devices, everything. Where is the best place for people to connect with you personally, as well as Heartland Ventures?
LinkedIn's pretty good, or email if you're able to put it in the notes. Feel free to.
Yeah, sure.
But LinkedIn is a great way to reach out to either us or follow our fund.
Perfect. And then last thing, stage is yours. Final thoughts. It could be a quote. It could be a send us off here. Whatever you want.
I think what's really interesting right now in the space is workforce training. So I think if you're thinking about starting something new or wanting to get into a space, I think anything that allows for upskilling the overall labor force is incredibly important right now.
That is what's up. Scale. Thank you so much, Max. It still sounds funny when I say the name Max, but thank you so much, Max, for coming on the podcast, sharing your stories, tips, amazing business tips and lessons. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning into another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite app and tell a friend about the podcast. You can also find us on Good Pods, where you can check out the podcast all your favorite people, favorite people in the world, are listening to. And to learn more about podcast production, you can do so at MaxPodcasting.com. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!